There's no doubt that football is one of the most physical sports there is, with contact on every single snap and hits that are felt throughout entire stadiums. But something that not a lot of people fully understand is that football is far more of a mental battle than just a shoving match, and there's nowhere that's more true than at the professional level. Just about all of the players in the NFL are at the peak of their athletic ability, save a few less physically demanding positions, but among teams of freak athletes, there are really two ways to stand out. Either be a complete mutant that isn't even governed by physics, or a player that wins mentally first before the ball is even snapped. They're studying game film, mapping out tendencies in someone's eyes or stance, but in the heat of the moment, there's really no better surefire way to get into your opponent's head and out of their comfort zone than the good old tried and true method of trash talking. Some might say that it's unnecessary and compensation for actual ability, but I mean most players at the pro level know that it's not about trying to humiliate the man standing across from you as much as it is just knocking them off their game. You have to take every advantage you can get, and if someone isn't mentally tough enough to keep their eyes up and ears plugged, all of a sudden you've got your opponent completely out of focus and unbalanced emotionally in a time where they just can't afford to be. So in honor of those players who stand out as a cut above the rest when it comes to getting their matchups head, today I'd like to start the first ever NFL Trash Talk Hall of Fame, starting first with the best to do it on the defensive side of the ball. There have obviously been a lot of loudmouths on offense as well over the years, so if you guys enjoy this video, maybe a part 2 will be in order to get them involved as well. But before we jump into who's hurt the most feelings and gotten paid great money to do so, I'd like to give a huge shout out to SeatGeek for sponsoring this video. I'm sure plenty of you have heard of them by now, but if you haven't, SeatGeek compares ticket prices from all across the internet and puts them in one simple color-coded system to let you know what the absolute best deals are at a given venue. There's still plenty of football left to be played in the NFL season, so if you're looking to go see your favorite team soon, then it wouldn't hurt to go check them out just to see how much you can save. And to sweeten the pot a little bit, if you use my code SETTHEEDGE, you'll get $20 off your first purchase at the link below. So thank you again to SeatGeek, and without further ado, let's talk about the evolution of trash talk itself in the National Football League. As anyone will tell you about the state of football right now, for better or worse, the league has certainly changed. The NFL has moved in a clear direction of becoming safer and more commercially viable as a product, and with that has come a lot of astroturfing of rules, not just in what players can do to one another, but what they can say to one another. Back before the 21st century, there weren't typically 5 live microphones on the field and another couple in the back of some players' shoulder pads for live broadcasting, and that lack of transparency gave a lot of leeway for some extracurricular conversation. Players weren't typically trying to be friends, they were trying to gain a competitive edge by any means necessary, sometimes in extreme cases even researching a player's personal life in advance before a game in order to have the most dirt possible in the heat of the moment. Nowadays, based on what players and former players have said about the game, there's a lot more respect there, and while there's still obviously trash talk, it isn't near as prevalent or as scathing apart from a few players that are cut from the old cloth. Now, it's probably a good thing that players don't bring up each other's wives and kids much now, but the increasing overall sanitation of language and penalties for jawing at the opposition is a step too far in my own personal opinion. I've always been pretty vocal on this channel in support of making the league safer for its players, and I also get that the NFL wants their brand to be as squeaky clean as possible considering all the whirlwinds of controversy that are already drummed up each year, but I mean football is really about striking that balance between composure and being completely uncaged, and I think we'd all benefit from seeing players waiting until after the game to be buddy-buddy to make the sport as competitive and entertaining as it can be, but you know, that's just my 2 cents. When it comes to on-field trash talk though, everybody can get involved, but there's no doubt it's more prevalent on the defensive side of the ball since you're always in the best position when you can match every move your opponent makes physically, and then let them know after the play that they're in for a very long night just to let that failure really marinate. Let's start with the most obvious party in defensive backs. As you might be able to tell from their constant impulse to signal that a pass is incomplete, even if they have absolutely nothing to do with it, it takes a good deal of confidence to play any one-on-one position. Everybody in the stadium knows when you win or lose your matchup, so getting into the head of your opponent can reap you some pretty solid rewards, but that doesn't mean you get to go without backing up everything you throw out there. A player who towed that line pretty well was former cornerback Cortland Finnegan, whose career spanned a decade of annoying everyone he lined up against and even included an all-pro nod, so he obviously found something to do right. But he also talked so much that he didn't always back up his mouth, as he declined rapidly after leaving Tennessee and will probably only really be remembered for getting beaten down after pissing off Andre Johnson. Then, of course, there's a similar story in Josh Norman, who quickly became a household name for his role in Carolina's stellar 2015 defense and subsequent rivalry with Odell Beckham Jr., which included bringing a baseball bat out to the field in pregame, tons of unnecessary roughness flags in their matchups, off-field insults thrown, and some crazy losses of composure that made their rivalry one of the most interesting stories in football. But after the first few electric matchups, Beckham's talent typically won out, and after Norman settled down in Washington, it became more of a one-sided rivalry before fizzling out, and Josh Norman hasn't really been considered an elite corner for the past few years now. But at least for a while there, that earworm voice of his certainly burrowed its way into at least a couple of receivers' heads, and I've got little doubt that even though he's made less noise on a national stage, that his mouth actually remains quiet on the field today.
Hey, you that fast guy? Yeah. Oh, okay. I figured you were. I was just trying to make sure. Hey, Kurt, I'm holding you to your challenge today. Throw the ball. Hey, chill out. Chill out, bro. Hey, chill your ass out now. Chill out now.
Of course, we couldn't go about naming modern-day trash talkers without bringing up the very loud Jalen Ramsey. He slowed down from his complete dominance over just about every receiver in the NFL back in 2017, but his mouth certainly has not backed off in the time since. He's probably most famous on that front for a lengthy rant where he rated the majority of quarterbacks in the NFL as either good, average, or trash, with Josh Allen getting by far the worst of it. But he's got a couple more things that make his resume stand out even early in his career, making AJ Green lose his cool, which rarely happens, building up rivalries with upcoming matchups like he did with Tyreek Hill, and even coming after trash talk legend Steve Smith himself in just his third start as a pro, telling him he was washed up and finished all game long, and saying after the game that it was very easy to tell that he was the one that got in Smith's head. Going toe-to-toe in that arena is no easy task. Now, Ramsey's toned down the public comments in recent months, but nothing's changed on the field now that he's with the Rams, and with his personality, I don't expect it to be too long before we see another article with some choice words about someone he has or hasn't squared off against. So we'll patiently wait to see if his play can be consistently elite enough for him to one day earn a spot in my coveted, made-up Trash Talk Hall of Fame.
You're not strong enough. You're not strong enough, 15. Ah, shut up. That double move was not it, A-Rod. You don't want them problems. I'm telling you, you don't want them problems. We gonna beat your ass. Come on, dog. Hey, dog, that ain't easy, bro.
With that, we get to some real heavy hitters, two players who have played some of the best football seen at the corner position, and our first two Trash Talk Hall of Fame inductees. First, let's talk Richard Sherman. I think the best way to sum up his intensity on the field is really just to look at Aaron Andrews' face during his infamous rant that followed the 2013 NFC Championship game.
Take me through it.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're gonna get.
All right, stop. That is the face of someone who does not know what she's gotten herself into. But for Sherman's fascinating career arc that started as a 5th-round pick out of Stanford, continued through playing a huge role in one of the best defenses of all time, and now leading another incredible defense for his former division rival, his trash talk has been one of the few constants in that dominant span. Going after Tom Brady, embarrassing Skip Bayless on his own show, bending an entire nation out of shape with a single rant, it's been a roller coaster of a ride, and with him now rolling with the Niners to what's now a near guaranteed playoff berth, Sherman has not only been a shutdown corner, but also a pure source of energy for every player that's around him. So, with a 4-time All-Pro career still not finished, don't be surprised if we get a few more sound bites in big moments before he throws out his last insult.
You suck. You wanted this noise. You wanted this noise. You suck. You play for a team that sucks. Shut up. Shut your trashy ass up, 14. You're sorry. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of time right here.
Then, as I'm sure many of you would guess, our last player from the defensive back ranks is a first ballot Hall of Famer for his play on the field and his constant boasting and berating of his opponents, prime-time Deion Sanders. To say that Sanders revolutionized the DB position would really be an understatement, considering he gave it far more superstar potential than it had ever had before. As arguably the best shutdown corner of all time, he managed 9 consecutive All-Pro seasons and 22 total touchdowns across all 3 phases of the game. There's also not too many people who have hit a home run and scored a touchdown for 2 pro sports in the same week, because he's the only one to do that, and that was just his first week in the NFL. But for Deion, it wasn't just about being an athlete, it was about being a performer. The high step, his bandanas, and most of all, his attitude every time he walked out of the tunnel. He was better than you, and you were going to hear that all game long until you accepted it as the truth, and it didn't need to go any further than that point. While Sanders was a constant media presence, he didn't often stoke the flames of controversy into post-game interviews. He just let his numbers do the talking once the lights went out. And with 53 career picks, nearly 8,000 total yards as a defensive player, and 2 Super Bowl rings, I'd say that about wraps up the conversation pretty nicely. But we aren't done here just yet. The art of trash talk doesn't stop at the corner position, because intimidation is equally effective anywhere on the field. Just look at the dominant run of Ray Lewis and Terrell Suggs with the Ravens, or the havoc Lawrence Taylor created in all avenues of the game. All of their success came along with a constant ability to be in their opponent's head before the ball left the center's hand. But among their ranks, there's a couple of defensive linemen who stand a true cut above in their reputations as true pests. 2 more players that are worthy of being inducted here as first ballot Trash Talk Hall of Famers. First off, let's talk about the dominant and maybe not so universally liked career of Warren Sapp, who has a self-proclaimed master's degree and 2 doctorates in the field of trash talk itself. Lots of people have got mixed opinions on Sapp, and there's probably good reason for that. He's one of the best defensive tackles of all time, and he also had a propensity to walk straight up to the line and then cross way over it, multiple times in fact throughout his career. But aside from his dicey reputation, his acclaim for what he was able to do on the field is very well deserved. He had a bitter rivalry with Packers QB Brett Favre of all people, who would often get so fired up at Sapp that Favre's teammates would ask him to calm down so as not to anger him any more than he already was. As you can probably imagine, that didn't exactly work wonders when it came to preventing him from getting sacked. But his extracurricular comments weren't reserved for just quarterbacks. Any and every man who attempted to block Sapp on the O-line was going to get an earful before the snap, and then likely get beat off the ball and then watch their quarterback hit the dirt. Sometimes, in the few rare cases he ended up in the end zone, they'd even get to watch a lengthy dance to remind them of all of their failures. As someone who brought vitriol all throughout a 13-year career in the league, there's no doubt that Sapp deserves to be in conversation as one of the most colorful on-field poets of all time, because among the defensive players we've discussed so far, there's really only one other man who can hold a candle to his ferocity. Oh yes, we are talking about John Randle, a man who, to this day, no one is entirely sure isn't completely insane. Covering his face entirely in black and yelling all Sunday, every Sunday, were only really the very surface of the effect this undrafted D-tackle had for the Minnesota Vikings in an ever-dominant career. He was considered to be undersized for the position at 6'1", and he even hid a chain under his sweats when first reporting to the Vikings to try and boost his weight so he could make the team. He came into the league with a chip on his shoulder, and that lit a fire in him that burned all throughout his career like a switch he couldn't shut off, striking fear into quarterbacks' hearts as he ranked up the 10th most sacks in NFL history at 137.5. Just like fellow inductee Warren Sapp, who we just discussed, Randle also had an ongoing rivalry with Packers quarterback Brett Favre, who he sacked more than any other player did in NFL history. Randle was 2 completely different people on and off the field, transforming from collected into growling and making car noises on the sidelines to change his state of mind, and it worked. Not only did he confuse and intimidate his opponents with the sheer amount of talking he did, but when it came to trash talk, Randle did his research. Back then, there wasn't Twitter or really easy ways to study someone's past and make things personal, but Randall would go to the extra effort of reading through newspaper articles about his opponents to pick out the names of their wives, kids, their different hobbies, all just to throw out at random during the game to really make your eyes bug out just before you lined up in your stance. Nothing truly malicious, but still out of bounds enough to shake players that were already probably about to have a pretty long day. As an undersized player, he kept his motor and mouth running at all times, but once the clock hit 0, he always shook hands with his opponents and left it all out on the gridiron. And at the end of the day, that's really what consummate trash talk etiquette is all about. Give them hell out on the field as long as you don't go too far, and always make sure that you remember it's a game at the end of the day. So, John Randall, here's to your own personal first ballot entry into the Trash Talk Hall of Fame. So, there you have it, just a few of the best there ever were at never letting their opponents forget a mistake, or of course just how sorry they really were. While trash talking has become sort of a lost art in the modern NFL, it still remains one of my favorite elements in its history, since games within games are always the most fun to keep an eye, or in this case, ear on. Now, there's obviously a lot more characters that could have been covered at length and even inducted, especially from the offensive side of the ball. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to tell me down below if you want to see this made into a multi-part series, because trust me, this one was a blast to research and make. So to close this one on out, in the spirit of adding just a little extra heat to the game we all know and love, I think it's only fair to pass this particular outro on over to John Randall.
We're coming! Knight Rider! Knight Rider!